Yeah, for point number 5, and this is one that I've held fast on for basically all of my fantasy career. My first ever fantasy draft, I took LaDainian Tomlinson. I had a draft team, or I had a fantasy team once named I'm thinking RBs. Avoid the zero running back strategy like the Rona.
Absolutely.
How is it
I
even a
I will never
strategy?
I have never understood that. I mean, I've been playing fantasy football now since 2007. I can't count past 10, so I don't know how many years that is, but
He said, "I don't know how many words that is." That's yeah, you can't count, buddy.
can't count, can't talk. But no, the point stands. I don't understand the zero RB strategy. I don't understand going light on running back. I don't understand any of that. So if either of you wants to try and talk a little sense into that to me, because I don't understand it.
I think Christian and I are in the same
I,
boat.
I can't do it. The only way that I can see a zero RB strategy playing out, or the only way that I can see it even being a defensible strategy where someone can explain it to me and I'll say, you know what, I can agree with that, would be in a dynasty startup draft where the peak times and the peak seasons of wide receivers last longer than the peak of NFL running back careers. So if you load up on wide receivers early in your dynasty startups, chances are those positions will be set for you a whole lot longer than if you go with a CMC or a Dalvin Cook or someone that is at their peak right now. You may get 3 great years left of CMC when you could get, let's say, 6, 7, 8 great years of DJ Moore. In a redraft league, there is no reason to go into a draft with a zero RB strategy. You are just playing with fire, especially in a season where 3 down workhorse running backs are becoming so rare. Almost all of your 3 down workhorses that don't have huge question marks are going to be gone in the first 2 rounds.
I mean, we touched on it a little bit earlier, but we've already had a draft this year where literally 11 of the first 13 picks were running backs, and yeah, their reaches the further on we got into that, because we kept paying attention, running backs were going off the board like crazy, and yeah, they were all reaches with great names still on the board. But when you see the trend of the league is taking all the running backs that they can, it's probably a good idea to grab some of those before it's too late, and then you're taking guys that you hope play week 1. So I completely agree. Zero running back makes no sense.
When it comes to zero RB, a lot of fantasy owners, when they take on that strategy, are not planning on drafting a running back until the 5th or 6th rounds.
I don't know how that leads to a winning formula.
I can't see it. Their game plan is to go heavy on wide receivers, especially in PPR leagues. I will admit that the zero RB strategy is more effective in PPR than it is in standard. And PPR seems to be the more popular fantasy option. Even if that's the case, and you have, let's say you go wide receiver and wide receiver, Kittle or Kelsey in the 3rd round, you take your quarterback, and then you address running backs, your RB1 on your team is probably going to be either David Montgomery, Devin Singletary, Melvin Gordon, Philip Lindsay, someone in that ballpark, and I cannot see a championship team that relies that heavily on those running backs as your top producing runner. Now, the zero RB strategy tends to hope for and plan for running the top running backs going down and you picking up a 3 down back later on. And I don't want to put all the chips on the table and depend on not only a top runner going down, but also depending on my waiver claim being the one to get that backup running back to raise my team up to a championship level.
Yeah, too many moving pieces there.
If you're depending on an injury, and then not only depending on the injury, but you're also depending on your waiver claim picking up the backup that gets the benefit of that injury, that is a lot to bet on a strategy for fantasy football.
Obviously, we're recommending that you go. I mean, all of us here are kind of the same in that sense. Where we're recommending you go running back early.
I would go running back early and often because in any draft, I'm going to want 3 running backs out of my first 4 picks in a fantasy football draft. And the place where I would pass on the running back out of those first 4 rounds is probably the 3rd round, where I'm looking at a Calvin Ridley slightly before his ADP, a DJ Moore, a Robert Woods. Any of those guys have such high upsides for the 2020 season that they're definitely worth that 3rd round pick. And if I'm taking guys with those type of upsides at wide receiver, that means I'm passing on the guys that we included in our do not draft list. It's Todd Gurley, Le'Veon Bell, David Johnson, Chris Carson. All of those guys have huge question marks to depend on. So I would rather not depend on those question marks. I'd rather have my starting running back set in rounds 1 and 2, take my wide receiver in the 3rd round, and then see where my draft board looks in the 4th.